I find that the emotion and shadow work, really, if you approach it with an open heart, it's pretty automatic, because there's nowhere to run. There's just nowhere to run. That's the beauty of it. It's like, the needle on the phonograph record, if you think about that. You could say that the needle is your attention, or your perhaps you could say awareness. Let's say awareness, not your awareness, just awareness. And then the phonograph record is the sort of luminous nature of appearances. But we perceive that we can somehow shape that awareness, or we try to, through the reflective consciousness, the reflective capacity of our own minds. And we believe that we can make it look like it doesn't look. Meaning this moment, we can make reality look like it doesn't look. We can make reality look like some predisposed idea of how it could look, or it should look. And I don't mean in the grandiose sense of reality in a cosmic, metaphysical sense. I mean what is happening right now, or what just happened. Like that could look different. It could be different. It should be different. We do this all the time, right? But what I want to suggest is that what we bring to that decision, that seeming decision to want to color it based on our own predispositions, it's not volitional. It's so funny because we backward extrapolate the volitional self based on years, maybe lifetimes of conditioning about what we should want, what we should prefer. Yeah, so we backward extrapolate the volitional self, the one that chose what we prefer and what we don't prefer. But we actually didn't choose that. It was chosen for us. In fact, the movements of mind, the opinions, the resistance patterns, we didn't choose any of that. But when we're identified with thought and those resistance patterns arise, it really feels like us. It really feels like something I have to do. I have to defend this position. I have to be upset about this, right? I have to lose equanimity because this situation is the way it is. There's something in it that feels so personal, right? That's what we're always investigating here, one way or another. Because, again, the phonograph record and the phonograph are really in contact all the time. You can't peel awareness off of luminous, intimate textures. It just doesn't work that way. But you can even see it in spiritual teachings, that there's this thing called awareness, or this non-thing called awareness, that's all-encompassing and formless and whatever, as if it stands on its own, as if it's some kind of background to which there's a foreground called the textures, and between that there can be an intermediary that can sort of mitigate our experience of what's happening. But that's not the case. And that's why clear, deep, non-dual realization is really, really helpful here. It really takes, I'll say it this way, you can do a lot of shadow work up until this point, and you will, and we do. But there's something really magical about thorough non-dual realization, and that is, it takes away which can feel uncomfortable at first, but it takes away your ability to posit that kind of distance, the kind of distance that allows you to stand back from life and wish it was different, want it to be different. That leads to all the suffering. Those thoughts lead to all the suffering, to the entire inner world of suffering. But if you don't have that option, because there is just what's happening, there's just the sensations, there's just the sound, there's just this particular event that occurs right now as it occurs, then there's not something back here going, oh no, it shouldn't be this way, it could be different, and what if this happened like this, and what if it happened like that instead, and really just various forms of disassociation. So there is a timing to it. We can try to come to the non-dual contemplation too early. We can try to sort of, because we have tastes of it, sometimes even with an awakening, we may have pretty thorough experience of non-dual, but it's not stable. It seems to like be there and then gone. And so we can kind of try to bypass all of it and orient to that and so forth. And that can be difficult if there's a lot of reactivity remaining. But as that reactivity gets more and more subtle, contemplating the non-dual nature of reality itself, of experience itself, becomes very powerful, very critical in the deepening and essentially the deepening of realization and the clearing out of the fundamental or nearly fundamental to the psyche layers of delusion. They're not fundamental to reality. They're fundamental to the sense of the one who attaches to those positions, the one who attaches to those opinions, the one who attaches to those resistance patterns. And the only thing, once the non-dual realization is clear, the only thing really left to investigate is that it's a subtle phenomenon. It's a subtle phenomenon, but the experience isn't subtle. The experience often is pretty loud, big. That is the sense of the self that, again, is backward extrapolated from all of these layers of conditioning that say, this is what I want, this is what I'm supposed to be, this is who I should be, this is who I shouldn't be, this is what I should want, this is what I shouldn't want. And we have so much buy-in to all of that, right? But when you really get to the root of all of it and you see like, well, wait a minute, what is it that's actually identifying with all of that? What is actually there, if anything? The thoughts are there, so what? And we see through that with an awakening, right? We see like, okay, the thoughts aren't what I am. They're just thoughts. And then we drop into the emotions and we start to see the emotions also aren't what I am. And the sensations are rather non-dualistic, right? That's how, as we realize non-dual, we realize the non-dualistic nature of all the five senses. So then where does that self hide out? What is its nature? And the fact that it does have such a sometimes big signature or intense signature is good, right? Because it gives us that contrast between that and the fact that in clear seeing, in subtle and clear seeing, we can't actually find it at all. We don't find anything like that. We just find more texture of non-dual presentation. The work that needs to get done will present itself in the moment, in the flow of experience. And as I mentioned, this is what I was talking about earlier. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of heavy textures, a lot of emotional textures can and will come up during retreat, and will come up during sustained meditation. Even if you just happen to be meditating more than usual, or something heavy is happening in life, it will come up. But you can trust your intuition about when to explore that, navigate that, inquire into that at the level of the sort of narrative of it, the relative truth of it, and when to really fully let go of it. But at the same time of letting go of it, what you're doing is you're fully inhabiting the sense fields. You're, in a sense, dying into the sense fields. You're letting the sense fields overtake. You're letting the sound overtake. You're letting the sensation overtake. And a pretty simple and quick litmus test to whether or not that's working in the moment is let it happen. Let those senses overtake you. Let the sound completely replace you right now. Let the sensation completely replace you and just stay with that and see what comes. And if fear comes, that's okay. Stay with it. It may come and go. If it becomes intense, if it becomes a lot of resistance and you end up in your mind, then there may be some vasana work to do. Something is presenting itself as a kind of wedge in the psyche, something that's really compelling your attention. So then we do emotion work. There's so many ways to do it. I find one way or another a kind of combination of inquiry or looking into the beliefs in relation to the emotional experience, how it arose, what it means to you, what its source is, even the source of the emotion itself in your own life, how you are with that emotion, whether you tend to repress it, whether you tend to indulge it, either way. So that kind of inquiry into the beliefs around emotion, a combination of that, and then the direct feeling, direct experience, full immersion into the sense fields, but specifically the body sense field in regard to that emotional space. So some combination of those two aspects, in my experience, are what's most helpful. And how you approach that and what that combination is for you is going to vary. You may use a very specific technique or approach. There are many techniques and approaches to shadow work. There's therapy, traditional therapy. There are subtypes of therapy like, say, focusing, IFS, different kinds of inquiry, somatic modalities, TRE, spontaneous movement, intuitive dance, sound modalities, other relational modalities, circling. So all of these spaces, from what I found, can be really helpful in this emotional space, in this shadow space. When we're in retreat, when we're in silent retreat, we don't really have necessarily, during the silent rounds and so forth, access to these, the variety of these modalities. But what we do have access to is something really quite sacred, and that is we have access to this collective silence that is really not common in life. It's not common in day-to-day life, unless you just live an extremely solitary life or something like that, but most of us don't. So it's really grace that we have this shared, deepening, building silence in a retreat setting. And in that silence, I find that the emotion and shadow work, really, if you approach it with an open heart, it's pretty automatic, because there's nowhere to run. There's just nowhere to run. That's the beauty of it. It can appear how it's going to appear, how it needs to appear, how it wants to appear. And really, if you're willing to just be with it, as I described in my initial, not talk, but my guided meditation today, if you're willing to just be with it, as it appears, how it appears, as it needs to appear, then the work is being done. It may have an intense texture, it may have a gritty texture, it may have a subtle texture, it may have a tender texture, it may be deep, it may feel superficial, it may feel confusing, it may feel clear, but remaining in contact at the level of heart, being committed to being open to whatever appears here for this time, in this silence, when we're not distracting. This is the beauty of the silence, is we're not distracting. There can be some distraction in the mind, but as the silence deepens, even that will calm down. The mind calms. The belief we've had for so long that all of those distractions are fun, all those distractions are maybe even valuable in certain ways, there's some truth to that, maybe some relative truth, but we can find surprisingly that getting caught up in all those distractions, the momentum of those, it sort of helps us forget something. And by sitting in this silence, we remember it. And what we remember is, this is where we want to be. We want to be in full contact with what is appearing. We want to be in full contact with anything that's inside of us. We can't force that on the experience. We can't just say, I want to be here when you kind of feel like you don't. But if you sit with it long enough, if you sit with an open heart, which just means trust that even if this isn't going in any way the way I thought it should or could, if It's uncomfortable. It's not necessarily peaceful, but trust that it is meaningful. Trust that it is lawful with this process. Then with time, you will come to that place, I find. You'll come to that place where you realize, like, this is where I really want to be, though. Yeah. We probably all had the experience of, going into retreat and starting out sitting, lots and lots of sitting, especially a retreat that's something more kind of rigid, like a Zen retreat or something. Often at the beginning, it's, the mind really gets crazy. It's like, I don't want to do this. You can feel the resistance. It becomes very physical for the first, day or 2 days or whatever. And all of a sudden you just drop in and it's so peaceful. It's like, how did I get myself convinced that I wanted to avoid this? How did I get myself convinced I wanted to be somewhere else? So again, it's just a realignment of our maybe priorities and our perceptions with our intuition. And that is, we actually do want to be here, right here. We want to be here with whatever is. Because, well, this is all there really is, all there ever has been, all there ever could be. And it's beautiful, it's poignant, it's enjoyable, it's simple, it's natural. So yeah, shadow work gets perhaps a little more simple during retreat because what we're practicing is non-distraction, which is saying a lot. It's doing a lot. It's a big deal comparing it to how we normally live. It's a big deal to be non-distracted. You can also approach it or think about it from the standpoint of like sort of internal parenting, but being the best parent you ever could possibly be to yourself, to all aspects of yourself, to anything that's arising, which means not imposing any specific beliefs, but just holding space and offering acceptance. And when it's particularly difficult, offering compassion, love, and a kind of a dialogue, even if you need to, a dialogue of acceptance. Like, I accept whatever's here. If fear comes, the experience of fear, talking directly to it and saying, you have permission to be here. You have my full attention right now. Maybe I haven't been in contact with you before in this direct way. This may be more direct than in the past, but I still want to be here for you and with you. And there's no other thing that's interesting to me right now. I'm not going to get distracted. I just want to feel what you have to offer or show me or listen. What is it you have to say if you have a message for me? So sometimes being that kind of active parenting approach to the shadow material can be really valuable as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, as we get into the deeper portions of retreat, we're a day and a half in now or so, and retreat has that way of getting sort of, logarithmically deeper somehow. It tends to just deepen really profoundly over the second, third day. Take that opportunity. And even when off the mat, when you're not sitting, not meditating, or not listening to a talk or Q&A, see if you can stay in touch with that depth. See if you can keep a kind of continuous practice going in some sense. Again, it's not continuous longitudinally. Don't use it to beat yourself up for getting distracted, but more continuous in the depth itself. If you go deep enough, then everything is continuous. There is no separation. Stay in that depth if you can, and when you can, and when you remember, and bring it off into sleep. There's really magic that can happen in deep sleep and in dream sleep. So as you're in that kind of twilight of consciousness and you feel consciousness fading out, see if you can't just stay in that depth, that heart-based commitment to touching whatever needs to be touched, and going just a little bit deeper, a little bit farther than you have. letting go a little bit more than you have. Explore that sort of twilight of consciousness meditation as you go off to sleep. Now, if you're using a koan, for instance, or you're using a self-inquiry question or an inquiry question, this is a really, really good time to utilize that as you drift off to sleep. Take that into your unconscious. Take that into what is beyond your unconscious. In deep sleep, no content. It's a great opportunity. And you can also sort of combine the non-dual exploration with the experience of emotion, particularly the sensation aspect of emotion, the sensation component. So we'll kind of explore that. This will be maybe a little bit like a guided meditation, but we can explore it with whatever's in our experience, whatever sensation is there, just kind of putting our attention into the body, finding anything that is calling us, anything that feels important. It may not be anything definable. It may not be a specific emotion that you can put a label to. It may not be something that says, oh, there's shame here. It could just be a sort of tension somewhere in the body. It could be a sort of dull contraction somewhere. It may not even be fully in the body. It may sort of feel like a space both in and outside of the body. But just find whatever you find in this moment that is sort of calling your attention, or perhaps wants to be felt, wants to be explored. And just find it. Just notice it. And then just consider that it doesn't actually have to be labeled at all. We'll just stay with the actual experience and remove our need or tendency, if we have one at all, to label this. Just set that aside. It frees up some of our attention, some of our energy to fully feel this. Without thinking about it, we may even have a backstory to this. We may have some idea about where it came from or how long it's been here or what it means. Kind of beyond the label. That may be there, maybe in the background. It may not be, but if it is, or just in case it is, we can just offer this experience, offer it space to be here without any backstory. So we can just make the intention to set aside any backstories that might be there, any explanations that might be there, any descriptions that might be there, any evaluations about this whatever this is and however this is for you right now. So it's just really in its pure state. It's pure state. And now, without trying to change anything about it or do anything to it, just notice, like, where does it feel like the top of it is? You know? Just exploring the edges, if there is any edge to it. We're not trying to impose an imagined image onto this either. We're just going right to the experience. May not even have a top. And it may be moving, it may be still. However yours is just fine. Does the upper edge of it seem dense, light, heavy, clear? Now we can just let our attention drift down to the lower aspects of it, whatever those are, however those are. There may be more than one. Does it feel like it has some kind of rigid boundary? Or not? Maybe not even a noticeable boundary. Does some part of it feel stuck or weighted or not. Does it feel one-sided, more to one side of the body? Which is perfectly okay. Maybe more on the left side of the body, or the left side of the sensorium, the space of awareness. It may be more toward the right side, or it may just be amorphous and you can't really tell. It's fine too. And as we just sit with this experience fully, we can ask, is there any part of this, any part of it anywhere, any space in this, any, like the actual physicality of it, that I can't see or that I'm missing? Now, don't start thinking about this so much, but just trust that asking the question is valuable. Maybe is there any part of this that I just haven't fully seen? I'm not necessarily rejecting it or whatever, I just maybe don't notice it. Can it show me anything more if it needs to? And if it doesn't, that's fine too. And we're staying right with the sensations. Now, at the beginning, we set aside labels and we set aside narratives and all. The idea there was to set aside our own narratives and our own labels. But at this point, it's important, I think, to be open to the experience itself, that it may have something to say. It may not at all, but it may have something it wants to tell you. Maybe a word, maybe an image, memory. And I just want to point out that if that's happening, that's okay. As long as it feels really authentic and congruent with the experience itself, and nothing we've decided about it. It has to have its own voice in that way. Now, it may not, and for many people, it probably won't say anything. It's just a direct experience, and that's great. So just be open to anything it needs to demonstrate, show, tell. But most of the time, it just needs to be and move and feel and explore itself. Now, as we sit with it, we can also ask, and again, there's no right answer to this. It may not be the case, but we can ask, is there any part of the body that this is not inhabiting, that's left out? And if there is, and you may notice it, it's okay. It may not be that it's supposed to be inhabiting that space. But if you notice it, you can just sort of give it the opportunity, like, it's okay to be there too, if you need to be. Could be the heart space, could be a hand, your head, feet, who knows? And hopefully this is getting pretty fully nonverbal for most of us. Like, I'm not thinking about this. It's not a narrative. It's just a simple experience. But it's intimate, meaning it's experience close. And we're letting the experience lead, the sensation itself lead. And I don't want to make this too complicated or give too many steps or anything, but one last question I think is valuable to ask is there anywhere here that I haven't gone yet? Is there anywhere else to go? And it may just be another part of this space. It may be something deeper. It may be to another, maybe even a whole seemingly separate physical experience somewhere that feels closed off or something. It could be anything. And the answer may be no. And if the answer is no, then it usually becomes a very enjoyable place to stay because you're fully alert. You're in full contact. There's no agenda. You're intact emotionally. And you're congruent. Heart, mind, spirit. But that last question can be valuable. Is there anywhere else I haven't gone? Or is there any place I need to go from here? And if not, you'll find this very settled place, like a kind of deep equanimity. And then the exploration is just very naturally enjoyable in the simplest way. And this, I think, is a reasonably good overall approach to emotion work in a retreat setting, particularly in a retreat setting because we have so much space to do this. We have so few distractions. And lastly, as you utilize this approach, you may find if you get to the no question where there's nowhere else to go, Kenny has something to say. When you get to the no question where there's nowhere else you need to go, and it feels very peaceful, relaxed, equanimous, you sit with it, and after a while there feels like something dense or heavy building in some part of it or at the periphery or anywhere else in your experience, you just go there. Start all over again with that space. That's how we explore the shadow spaces in a concentrated meditative environment.